Hello, welcome to episode 38, and I'm going to discuss here the things I found most helpful in my recovery. And I've encapsulated in short form a lot of what I found helpful in a certain order. So let me come to discuss that. But the problem is, when I had my stroke, I had nowhere to turn, and there were no groups on the whole on Facebook or once I learned how to get back online, or the advice you got on the internet was sort of bland and uninformative, and little help from my doctors in understanding what really happened. They're treating the immediate symptoms, and the average stroke victim has much more questions, many more questions to answer. What do I do with my life now? Basic things like that, or how am I going to earn a living, or simple little things. But anyway, and when you realize how much emotional stress you're going through, and you're not able to cope with the stress because you just had a stroke. You're subject to fits of anger and fits of crying, and and I was a total mess. But anyway, I'm going to give you some basic principles I followed and basic um, uh, categories. So let's deal with the physical first. And I'm going to talk today about physical versus the mental versus the aspect of emotional support. So let's get into the physical. A good therapist from the outset is very important. At least it was for me. I had the luck of going to Roger Williams, a group in Rhode Island, after I was released by Mass General in Spalding Rehab. And the therapist Roger Williams assigned to me, I think he was a brilliant person. Because he first said, as he approached my body, he said, "We can't do anything with you until these knots are broken up." So first, because I had been bedridden for months, so he said, "Let's attack the knots first." And then he taught me various stretching exercises. Spasticity depends on like a carpet you roll up at night, and then unless you roll it out by stretching, the next day you're sort of stuck in that sort of 50% of your exercise value goes away every day. Hopefully you get the image of what I mean. So that's why I considered every day I do stretches. And he also taught me the basics of balance and suggested I get a balance board, which was another very helpful thing. And I discussed doing that in one episode. But anyway, it's like practicing scales in music or warming up before playing a sport. These essential aspects of conditioning are the basics of advancing, not immediately doing exercises to build your muscles up. First, you have to stretch and break up knots. I stayed with Roger Williams after my therapist said, "Hey, you can now, your home time is up, so we're going to send you to, if you're willing to, and I said yes. And luckily my insurance paid for it, a facility outside the house. And at that facility, they emphasize muscle building and strengthening. When the insurance stopped paying for therapy, and that was probably 4 months after my stroke, I took the many exercises I had learned and joined the gym at a local YMCA, and I spent an hour a day, 5 days a week, practicing at the gym for an hour, okay? An hour. So while there, I walked on a treadmill for 20 minutes. 20 minutes I lifted weights, not free weights, but various mechanically still attached so that you don't drop the weights on you or other people. And it usually was a Cybex machine, but that was a form of weightlifting. Then 20 minutes on the elliptical machine. And then several projects around the house, like building an outdoor brick oven helps. They were good for the remembering simple math and working on it. And also they taught me, again, hand-eye coordination. When you realize, hey, I jammed my hand or stubbed my toe, and be more careful next time. And they developed the right side of my body for strength. Lifting the bricks was when I was trying to lay brick, and just building the base, 80-pound bags of concrete meant, a lot of activity when I built the oven. By the way, please like and subscribe to my channel. I wish to spread the word that one's life is not necessarily lost. But anyway, okay, let's get on with the next category, the mental. This was a harder nut for me to swallow. Why? I had fallen the most in the dumps in that area. I was not super talented as a sports person. I mean, as a little boy, I played reasonably. I played some high school football. But I was not anything to remark on. But the verbal part, the mental, yes, that it was an area where I earned my living by that. At first, I just wanted to get to the point where strangers would not immediately notice the stroke in me. But more and more, I become conscious of I've lost so much of my mind, 1/3 to be exact, supposedly, the doctors claimed. My entire persona in livelihood had been centered around speaking, which I could no longer do, writing, which I could no longer do, and implementing complex business strategies, which I, again, could no longer do, etc., etc., etc. My brain felt like it was shattered into 1,000 pieces, and after 3 months, when I saw little improvement, I really started to worry. I realized that my major job, was going to be much worse than I thought. Slowly but surely, I would have to put the 1,000 pieces, like a puzzle, back together again. It was a massive undertaking, but it was going to have to be done. To someone who has not had a stroke, it is difficult to imagine the mental fatigue, confusion, and excitability that the stroke survivors feels. I references my second episode, episode 2 of this channel. I like the image presented of one image is of a non-stroke brain represented by train tracks, and the stroke brain represented by a mishmash of train tracks. But I like better the image of a electrical panel, because that relates to how a brain works. When all is well, the panel is well ordered and in good shape. But when the stroke happens, then it's like someone blew up the panel. The mental category as verbal versus mechanical skills versus emotional skills, meaning as opposed to emotional support, a separate category, and the one I chose to mention last. And don't forget that left out of my efforts is simply time, which is a contributing factor. In other words, the farther you get from the stroke event, the more you should heal. That certainly is a factor in crying, anger, anxiety. So the anxiety and crying and all that you feel, with time it should ameliorate a little or a lot. So let me take the verbal part of talking about under this category mental. My writing, it seems, looking back, was not affected as much in content as in speed. To make it worse, it took me months, 4 months, even before I could hold the pen, and 3 months before I could even begin to type, pecking away. But my thought process more and more came together. Now talking was different. You have to string words together for others quickly. Once I could speak at all. I reference episode 5 here, where I learned to speak again. That's the title. But I found myself, one trick, I found myself forming in my mind an anticipation of where the conversation is going. And then a gap occurs when someone else leaves an opening, so I can make a small contribution so that the people don't think I'm totally like a fool and look like an idiot to others. I practiced speaking in front of a mirror, tried singing the words, worked on my diction, played Scrabble. I go through that, how I learned to speak again. But it took a very long time to feel confident speaking again, roughly 10 years. I was speaking halting sentences. No, I was speaking words within 3 months, but very slowly and often stuttering and all these problems I never had, and now I had them. I found that given time, I could come up with sentences in my mind. It was simply getting them out that was the problem. And just as I went to therapy, I prepared a good answer for fill out this form. And I suddenly couldn't say it. I couldn't speak. So that hesitation I used to have, don't be discouraged. It eventually will go away if you continue to make efforts. You know that old saying that better to keep quiet and let people assume you know what's what rather than expose yourself as a fool by opening your mouth? That was my general rule for the first few years. Mathematical, this is a part where I suffered a lot also. I was at first unable to do simple math. My memory for numbers, which is very important for mathematical calculations, especially in your head, like, oh, you started, and, 32, and then you forget the 32. Then you forgot the first set of numbers. But anyway, it came with time, so my memory sort of came back. And I bet you have the same problem. And don't be discouraged. Takes a lot of work, but you'll come back. Certainly, you're going to come back various degrees, and depending on how hard you work and what kind of stroke you had, but you're going to come back. For instance, giving a phone number when people, I was talking on the phone with someone, haltingly, and then they give me a phone number, and they left it on voicemail. I had to play the voicemail probably 8 times to string it all together and to make a sense of the 7 numbers. So, and that's without an area code. So I had to play the message over and over again to get it right. I was totally confused. And it took me 10 years, basically, to sort of get my memory back for that. Now, emotional skills, I'm not talking about support, but emotional skills, meaning here I'm addressing, still under the category mental, the weird changes in your emotional balance where suddenly, with a stroke, you have an emotional makeup that is extreme, to say the least. Uncontrolled, even unprovoked crying, anger, aggressive behavior might be a symptom. You suddenly are impatient, maybe. I know that at first I had many of these symptoms, and I learned to avoid these situations that might provoke the crying. Amongst strangers, you have to be careful. As an example, privately, you can watch a schmaltzy movie or film. Never do that in public at first. Head the situation off at the pass. For a few years, I kept away from people so that as best as possible, they did not see me with any of these symptoms like crying or anger, as best I could. Obviously, I did these things, and obviously it was unavoidable, but as much as you can avoid them. Emotional support, the third major category, versus physical and mental. Now this is, for me, a very good category to talk about. I was very lucky and fortunate in my good friends and family. My wife, my kids, my brothers and sister were on the whole put up with me. My bosses and owners of the company were kind beyond belief. All of that was important to my recovery. I could focus on my covering rather than conflicts in my life. Meaning that they didn't cause roadblocks, again, that made it more difficult. I was determined to get better. They just at least made it easier and quicker. With that, I will leave you with my admonition. Don't give in to stroke. Thank you very much for listening. Until next time, bye.